Okay, welcome back. We are in a new set, familiar to me, but not so familiar to our guests. Alexandra, Ola, Kuba, nice to see you. It's not a mystery to the audience that we know each other, but probably we've never actually talked about the topic of neurodiversity. You've been so much, I think, engaged into your work that, and all of us, in fact, that this is actually the very first time that I will be interviewing my colleagues, experts on neurodiversity. So thank you for being here with us today. And I'm very excited about the topic that I think we just spotlighted at the conference. So let's continue the conversation. Let's enrich the conversation on neuro-inclusive working environment. But how are you feeling maybe as a starting question?
Well, I need to say I'm impressed with all the organization and everything. It's really amazing to be here, so thank you so much for that opportunity.
Thank you, Ola.
Yeah, definitely. It's like a really big thing and also a great opportunity for us to also raise awareness about this topic, because I think for both of us it's really important, I think, for both professional and the personal matters. So
absolutely. Would it help if we actually learned how many people are connecting to this segment or not?
Maybe not.
Maybe later. Okay. Let's start with basics. I'm thinking we have just gently or softly covered the topic of neurodiversity in the previous segment. Can we come back to basics, meaning the definition? So how can you even explain what neurodiversity is? It just became almost viral in organizations, but not sure if we're all aligned on the definition. So what are we talking about, in fact?
Okay, that's actually pretty hard question always for me to answer directly in short way, actually, because that's kind of new concept and new approach in psychology is still raising in the current science. But neurodiversity actually describes each and every one of us. We all are diverse in terms of the neurofunctioning. So every brain is slightly different than another one. And we have a different capacity for processing and receiving the information and to react on them due to that fact that we have a different capacity of the brain as well as the different connections since the very beginning of our life. So neurodiversity is the term to describe the differences among us in terms of our brains, in terms of our way to react. But that's not all.
So actually, if we ask ourselves a question, who is neurodiverse? We could say that everyone, because it is actually about every single person and the diversity of our brains, right? In other words, and sometimes actually we hear those statements or questions related to that the spectrum of different behaviors and different preferences and restrictions as well. And I think it's actually sometimes not visible, but so important to realize that there are quite a few people, and we've heard also about specific numbers before, right, in the previous presentation, that it might be up to 20% or even more of the society of people who can really struggle in a situation and really need to make a lot of effort to fit into a regular situation that might be not even something that anyone else is thinking of, is just behaving naturally in it.
Yeah, and actually, that's I need to share that it's really case of my life, story of my life. As before I was diagnosed with ADHD, as I am the ADHD, I used to wonder many times why so that I need to put a lot of effort, and it's so difficult for me, to perform and to act on the normal, regular, basic things. And in the same time, I can, dream all the time and be so far away on the ground, just with my dreams and ideas. And it's so easy for me to come up with any. And at the same time, if it comes to administration things, if it comes, to deal with such normal, regular thing as even cleaning my house, it's a huge difficult for me. And I think that's described neurodivergency as a term, because this is something that we call people with ADHD, with autism spectrum, used to call disorder, dyslexia, all of those, again, these so-called disorders that used to be diagnosed as a neurodevelopmental thing, so that we are born with certain capacity for the certain function in the life, in performing in some certain stimulation, let's say.
I understand. So number one, since we all represent certain neurological profile, that should make neurodiversity a case for everyone, and we should all feel responsible for creating a neurodiverse, positive neurodiverse environment. That's one. I'm also thinking, what is, in fact, the neurodivergent? You mentioned ADHD and ADHD. It's such a tongue cracker. Is there anything else that falls into that profile? Maybe I'm even calling it wrong. What is neurodivergent, in fact?
I would say that this term stands for the way to describe the alternative way of the neural pathway development, or the alternative way of the processing of the information, like neurologically, I mean. So we can imagine that we are all the general population, and more or less, let's say 65, 66% of us have more typical, more similar brain, so the more typical capacity for the reacting and adapting to the certain situation, and that's our civilization is created. But there are those who has completely different capacity of their brain, so they can be extra efficient in some type of behavior on some type of the information of the task they are given with, but in the same time, the normal regular thing and the normal adaptability is much harder, as Ola already said. Sometimes they need to put a lot of effort and energy. So I would say that this is the alternative brain, and exactly it means neurodivergent, the alternative way of thinking, feeling, and processing the information.
And we are talking about ADHD, but also autism spectrum. We talk about things like dyscalculia, like dysgraphia, like
high sensitivity,
Exactly.
all kind of temperamental traits that are slightly different from the typical way of being in the given culture.
Okay, thank you for putting a kind of like a frame on these definitions, because they're even difficult to pronounce, not mentioning, actually understanding what's behind the term. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice slowly. What you're both saying is that if neurodivergent individuals are put in the right environment, they can bloom. So it's about really finding or setting up an environment in a way that where they can use their greatest potential and strengths, right? But does it really need any diagnosis? Like, should I be looking into any form of diagnosis to better understand if I'm dealing with neurodivergent audience or not? Therefore, should I be using diagnosis to be a better communicator with neurodivergent?
It's a very good
population?
question, especially when it comes to adults, right? Because it's kind of a different story when we talk about kids, because usually diagnosis is also related with a lot of support opportunities. It could be also the same for adults, but it's actually up to that individual to choose if I'm going to be sharing that diagnosis with someone or not, or if it's going to be information for myself, because I need to realize what is happening to me and how I can cope differently. It can often explain a lot, actually. It can be something that helps to understand why things are happening to me in the way that they have been happening. But it can also explain a lot to people outside, I would say to everyone around that individual who's neurodivergent, right? Now, when we speak about the business context, the topic is a little bit tricky, right? Because on one hand, diagnosis can be sometimes treated as a label, as, putting someone into the box, right? And then we know that it's not necessarily one box that is going to be the same for every individual with the same diagnosis, right? So if you know one person with autism spectrum, you know one person with autism spectrum, right? It doesn't mean you are an expert and you know everything about autism spectrum, and because everyone would behave the same way, right? So it's a little bit tricky, but also I think it is, something that can be helpful once we use it in a smart way, in a way that is going to be supportive, in a sense, when we talk about our preferences, our needs, surrounding kind of environment that helps us to be effective in the organization, anything that helps us to perform better, basically, right? So this is where we can actually use the diagnosis also to speak about those preferences and those ways to behave and to act and to perform better.
So there needs to be a clear purpose and a right intention behind the data or the diagnosis. But I agree, diagnosis is such a tricky word in the corporate context. We tend to love words under the category of service, audits, but for some reason we are not really friends with the term diagnosis, right?
But here we need to be especially careful, really. First of all, diagnosis is a very private, intimate information about myself. So it's always, and it should be always up to me and only up to me whether I want to come up with this diagnosis, to share this with other people so they understand me better. But I don't need to do it necessarily with using exactly the term ADHD, autism, or so on. I can just describe my needs. I can just describe how I function, what I need to be better, to perform more efficient, and so on, without using the label. Because with the label, sometimes this is the tricky thing, that people can, stick to them sometimes too harshly, let's say. And so, then there is this common understanding, okay, person with ADHD is always distracted and always impulsive. But in fact, not always. And it's always up to situation. The same with autism spectrum condition, let's say. It doesn't mean that those people are not well in the social relation always. They can sometimes struggle more with understanding the context of emotions, but in the same time, they can be really great partners.
Yes, they function in a very specific, unique manner.
Exactly.
So what you're saying, Kuba, is without revealing the diagnostic part, it's fair to also take some accountability and responsibility for just communicating to your teammates, manager, how I function, what are my preferences, and where I struggle. Would you agree?
Yeah, if we are talking about neuroinclusivity or neuroinclusion in the work, I always think that it's the responsibilities for both sides. So, okay, the company can provide us some tools or some, let's say, that environmental factors to fit in easier, but it's always up to me as the person to take care of myself and to communicate what I need to perform better. Because without this responsibility of myself, there is, no point for actually providing neurodiversity to organization, because it's always the collaboration of the two sides, right?
Yes.
And here's, I think, also a great role for the manager, especially, right? So it's that micro level that is very important, because, of course, on the organizational level, company can provide specific policies, adjustments, right? There might be some opportunities when it comes to the design of the office itself, right? But at the end of the day, it's going to be the relationship between the manager and that neurodivergent individual that will help that individual to thrive. Right? So it might be up to the manager to ask some questions as well, to understand a little bit better, regardless if it is a question, it's a matter of diagnosis or not, right? But it might be helpful actually to check with the employee, what are those things that make you feel comfortable in the office? What are the things that are helping you perform better, right? How do you find yourself with specific tasks, right? To really go deeper into what makes people feel efficient, but also comfortable. Got it.
And I would say not for neurodivergent person only, for every employees, because as we said in the beginning, we all are neurodiverse. So we all have the different needs for certain stimulation, and I think it shouldn't be only tailored for neurodivergent individuals, but for each employees, just to check with them what do they need to perform better and to be more themselves in order to to work with others. And I think that's the very key of our mission if it comes to neurodiversity at workplace.
So one last tip from each of you on how to create neuro-inclusive environment to make everyone comfortable.
So I think on one hand, there will be a couple of levels, right? At least 3 levels, I think, here. So one level would be the kind of macro level, I would say, organizational level of policies, adjustments, specific programs when it comes to development opportunities, specific way to look at your recruitment process, right? So all the HR world, I would say, that can actually look at everything that is designed in a neuro-inclusive ways, right?
Okay.
So looking at specific ways we ask questions or specific opportunities for growth, for changing positions within the organization even, right? Skill set, anything like that. Then we have the manager level as well that I mentioned already, right? So for the manager to really leverage the strengths, because we haven't spoken about it, but there's a huge topic related to, those abilities, those strengths that might be leveraged for those neurodivergent individuals if the society, if the environment is helping them to use them best, right?
Okay.
And then it is also up to the individual, like Kuba said, when it comes to your own responsibility. So if I'm aware of my limitations, my preferences, and my strengths, I can communicate it, and I can also use it to find myself better in the organization.
So yeah, the very first step is always should be just to raise awareness, just to speak, just to convince people to see themselves as the diverse individuals, and that we can use this diversity just to collaborate better. And I think it's important to do it step by step, because Neuroinclusive, I think, is a long process, and especially for this new raising awareness of neurodiversity movement as it is. So let's, take it easy, slowly,
I
and
like
step
this.
by step.
I like this advice. Kuba, let's take it easy.
Thank you.
I'm conscious that we have just touched the surface, but we're happy to have you still in a studio and hopefully available to our audience to maybe address more questions. It's such a deep and broad topic, but thank you for making time for being us today, and let's hope this conversation on neurodiversity is just starting.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thank you.